So we're learning the second Sikha on Parsha Shlach in Chelek Chav Ches on page 93. The shir today is being learned to Lenishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. In Seif Parsha Seinu brengt Rashi from Rabbi Moshe Darshan. Towards the end of this week's Parsha, Rashi brings from Rabbi Moshe Darshan that explains the following: Lama nismacha Parshas Mekoshes leParshas Avedis Alilim. Why in the Torah is the story about the Mekoshes, which is a story about an individual that was Machal Shabbos, he desecrated Shabbos by being a Mekoshes. The meaning of a Mekoshes, there's a few opinions in Gemara. Either Mekoshes is the one that detached, he cut produce attached to the ground, the Malacha of Kaitzer, or Ma'amer, he gathered produce that was spread out in the field to one place. There's other opinions in Gemara as well. I'll be referring to the Mekoshes throughout the Sikha with the term of the Pasuk, the Mekoshes. So why is this Parsha about the story of the Mekoshes written in the Torah near the Parsha of idol worship? Loimar, to tell you, Shamachal is Shabbos, one that desecrates Shabbos, Ka'ovid Avedis Alilim, is compared to one that serves an idol. Sha'af hi shkula k'chol mitzvahs chulu, because serving an idol is also equivalent to all mitzvahs of the Torah, and therefore the same applies to Shabbos. In Tosfos state, Tosfos addresses the place where the story of the Mekoshes is recorded in the Torah, and he addresses another point. And he says, Maisa Mekoshes haya betchilas arbaim, the story of the Mekoshes was in the beginning of the 40 years, towards the beginning of the 40 years when the Yidden were in the Midbar. Miyad achar Maisa Meraglim, immediately after the story with the Meraglim. In this week's Parsha, the story of the Meraglim. Dama b'Medrash, and the Medrash says about this, the L'Shem Shamayim Neskaven, that when he desecrated Shabbos, he was doing it with a good motive for the sake of heaven. Shahayu Aimrim Yisrael, because Yidden at that point said, Ki Mishanigzar Alein Shalei Lekanis La'aretz Mimaisa Meraglim, since it was decreed upon them not to enter the land. After the story with the Meraglim, so then Shuv Ein Mechuyavim b'mitzvahs. So we're not obligated anymore in fulfilling mitzvahs. Amad v'chil Shabbos. So the Mekoshes got up and desecrated Shabbos, Kadeshi Yaharig, and then he will be put to death, as it is with one that is Machal Shabbos. And v'yiru acherim, and everyone will see and understand that they are still obligated in fulfilling mitzvahs. Well, if he says, move on, this michas von Parshas Mekoshes to close Parshas Seinu. According to what Tosfos explained, it's understood how the story of the Mekoshes comes into the Parsha here in general, where it speaks about the story of the Meraglim, the spies that returned from Eretz Yisrael and gave a bad report and caused Yidden not to want to enter into Eretz Yisrael, and was the decree on Klal Yisrael that they will remain in the Midbar for 40 years. This is the Iker Sippa b'Parshas Seinu. This is the main story of this week's Parsha, and Al Shmuel wird angerufen die ganze Sedra. It's on this story that the name of the whole Parsha is Parshas Shlach. And the point is that the story with the Mekoshes came as an outcome of the story and the decree that happened after the Meraglim. Now, Vibal Torah stellt Parshas Avedis Alilim Tzvishin Ma'aseh Meraglim and Parshas HaMekoshes. Since the Torah does not immediately tell us the story about the Mekoshes after Ma'aseh Meraglim, but it does say in between the Parsha about idol worship, is move on. It's understood as Oich L'Dasa Tosfos that even in the opinion of Tosfos is Parshas Mekoshes Shaykh to Parshas Avedis Alilim Al Derech Virashi brengt von Rabbi Moshe Darshan. Even in the explanation of Tosfos, there's a connection of the Parsha of Mekoshes to the Parsha of idol worship, as similar to what Rashi brings. On vi Tosfos is Masber the Gemara, and as Tosfos explains what it says in the Gemara, that Yudeya after the Mekoshes was Machal Shabbos, so the Pasuk tells us that he was placed into a prison cell to wait to find out what is to be done with a person that's Machal Shabbos. So the Gemara says that Moshe Rabbeinu knew that the Mekoshes is to be put to death. Shenem, as the Pasuk clearly says, Mechalaleha, one that desecrates Shabbos, Mois Yumas, will have to die. Aval he didn't know how he should be put to death. There are 4 different ways one could be put to death by the capital punishment in Torah, and he didn't know which one. So in the words of Tosfos, as afagav the misistam cheneki. Although when the Torah simply says that capital punishment, meis yumas, usually means chenek, by strangulation. But still, he wasn't sure because logically, he was saying that desecrating Shabbos would be compared to one that serves idols, where there's a more severe punishment of death, and that's by stoning. The Mechal Shabbos before Hesya, because one that desecrates Shabbos publicly, is like he's denying Hashem, like one that serves Avodah Zarah. The Kaifer b'Maisa Bereshis. If he's not keeping Shabbos, he's denying the fact that Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. And therefore, there's a connection between the Mekaishish and Avodah Salilim. Now, to add to this connection, Oti Shaychis from Parshas Mekaishish to Parshas Avodah Zarah or Avodah Salilim is not in the Etzem Chet from Shabbos Avodah Zarah. The connection here, as explained in Rashi or in Tosfos, is the connection between Shabbos, or one that desecrates Shabbos, and Avodah Zarah. Aber von dem was die Smichas is nicht stam, and a chet stam von Chilul Shabbos, but the fact that the Torah is putting them in the same place in the Torah, not any kind of Chilul Shabbos, the concept of Chilul Shabbos in general, nor zum chet from Mekoshish Davke. It's being written here, the story of Chilul Shabbos is specifically the Mekoshish, is mistavet zu sagen. It's logical to say, as Parshas Avodah Salilim Atashachis zu dem Eifen in Chilul Shabbos, wie es ist given by Mekoshish to L'Shem Shamayim Niskaven. That here the connection of Mekoshish to the Parsha of Avodah Zarah is specifically to this kind of Chilul Shabbos, where it was done, he was Mechal Shabbos with a good intention. And we can add more to this, Vibalt, as das alt is a tale from Parshas Shlach, since the Parsha of Avodah Zarah and Mekoshish is all part of Parsha Shlach. Was Ikra is Parshas Meraglim. The main theme of the Parsha is the story of the Meraglim. Darf man sagen, as euch der Inyan hat a Shaychis in dem Teichen von Maisa Meraglim. The point that connects Avodah Zarah and the Parsha of Mekoshish, which is specifically a Chilul Shabbos with a good intention, is connected to the story of the Meraglim. Okay, so to explain how these are all connected, we have to understand better what it is that Tosfos says about what the Mekoshish's intention was. We'll understand this by first explaining what Tosfos says in the name of the Medrash. And again, to quote what the Tosfos says, the L'Shem Shamayim Neskavin, the Mekoshish had an intention for the sake of heaven. Shahoyu Oimrim Yisrael, since the Yidden had said, since there's a decree that they will not enter the land, Shuv Ein Mechuyavim b'mitzvahs, they are not obligated in mitzvahs, Omad v'chilul Shabbos kadesh yiharik v'yiru acherim. So he desecrated Shabbos, and then he was put to death, and everyone saw that they are still obligated in fulfilling mitzvahs. Now the question of this is, l'chayre, it would seem, in order to prove the point that they are still obligated in mitzvahs, why was it necessary to take such a drastic step and desecrate Shabbos? And especially this causes an even greater sin on his behalf. As dimchem lenafshei seichem, which is sheifich dam atzmai, brengt it zu as yaharik. That this is basically a person that's spilling his own blood, is committing suicide, which is an aveda for itself. Hat es gekent herausbringen durch Eivesein auf an ander mitzvah. He could have made the point that they're still obligated in mitzvahs by transgressing on some other mitzvah, or some very light sin, mechayev malchus, that the punishment would only be lashes, momen, or to pay, or something similar that would not have such a drastic result that he has to be put to death. In Targum Yenison, it says, in general, the same idea as the Mekoshish Eitzim, hat nit gemet mechal sein b'mezid, no l'shem shamayim neskaven. He wasn't looking to deliberately desecrate Shabbos, but he was doing it with a pure intention for the sake of heaven. Aber the Targum Yenison bavoren favas dafke mechal Shabbos given. And the Targum Yenison adds and explains why it was specifically to desecrate Shabbos. Bibalt modemelt no gewusst gzeiras Shabbata. Because at that point, Yidden only knew about the mitzvah of Shabbos, aber der Einish from Chilul Shabbos. However, the punishment for not keeping Shabbos, Knasa the Shabbat, the penalty, Loi ishtamei delay, was not yet known to Yidden. Is das the Kavane from the Mekoshish Eitzim? So this was the intention when he was Mekoshish. As durch seine Meisim is the Meida Knosov and Shabbos l'chol Beis Yisrael. Through the act that he did, the punishment of Shabbos became known to all Yidden. This is the way that Targum Yonasan puts it. So it was only specifically to let Yidden know what exactly is the consequence for desecrating Shabbos. Aber lefi ha-medrash hamuvi b'taisvis, as hat das getan, rauszubringen as mizmechuyev v'mitzvahs. In the medrash it says that he desecrated Shabbos in order for Yidden to know that they are obligated in mitzvahs in general. It's nit muvam favos hat ausgeklimt mechil Shabbos kanal. So the question is, why did he choose specifically to desecrate Shabbos? Is the beer bizarre? So the answer for this is Api Divrei Marsha, based on what the Marsha explains about the story of the Mekoshish of the Shaila. Via Zoi at the Mechal Shabbos given. Kidei lo hidia and welche mise is men done a Mechal Shabbos. How could it be, the Marsha asks, that he is desecrating Shabbos with the intention so that people should then know what happens to one that's Mechal Shabbos? Of course, this is not allowed. It may be a good intention, but how did he have such an idea that he would be Mechal Shabbos? Is that as Mazbe? So the Marsha answers and explains. Since the Malacha, the Mekoshish, whatever the Mekoshish is, the work that he did in Shabbos, was not something that he had any need for, nor lay the Beis Misachulu. Rather, he was only doing this to demonstrate to all of Klal Yisrael what Misa he would get by desecrating Shabbos. This now falls into a category of a malacha that's being done where you don't need this malacha for what its intended purpose is. For example, a person that digs a ditch or a hole in the ground, and he doesn't need that ditch in the ground. He just needs the earth to be used for something else. So the malacha itself and the purpose of the malacha is the need of creating this guma in the ground. But if he does not need that ditch or that hole in the ground, he just needs the earth to be used. That's a malacha that is being done physically, but the purpose of the malacha is for something else altogether. And in such a case, shehu pater l'Rab Shimon. According to Rab Shimon, one is pater when it's not done for the purpose of the intended purpose of this malacha. And therefore, when the Mekoshish did this, and he didn't even need the wood that he was gathering or cutting, so therefore, it's not a malacha, it's pater. And he concludes, this could be said also to explain what Tosfos brings from the Medrash, that he did this malacha to prove what would be the consequence. Why did he choose specifically this? What he did is really not a malacha because he didn't need the wood that he was doing the malacha with. So based on this, we can understand what the Medrash is saying here. Why he made the point that there's still chayiv mitzvahs by desecrating Shabbos. Because he did not want to sin. But he also wanted to make the point that Klal Yisrael should see, that is, what happens when one sins, that they're still obligated in mitzvahs. Und das ist dafke ba Shabbos. So this is only possible regarding Shabbos, was malacha she'en tzrich legufa is pater, when one does the malacha, but he does not need it for the sake of the malacha, so then he's pater, l'Rab Shimon, according to Rab Shimon's opinion. Biz v'ya steht in Kedushas Levi, and as the Kedushas Levi, here, and the Pasuk puts this, im kain leichilul Shabbos klal. Since he did it not for the sake of the malacha, but for another motive, a good motive, so then really he was not machal, he did not desecrate Shabbos at all. That's why he chose dafke chil Shabbos. Now, if this is the point here, the question becomes, so then why was he put to death? He really was not machal Shabbos. Afal pikein hat der Rebbe gesagt, mais yuma seish raga mais geimer. The halacha here is, as Hashem says, that he has to be put to death, and the death here is by stoning. Afal pi as klapishmaya galya, as is given a malacha she'en tzricha legufa. To heaven, it's revealed the truth that the malacha that he did was not needed for its intended use. On the shem shemayim neskaven, his intentions were pure. Biz as the chilul Shabbos klal, and therefore, as the Kedushas Levi says, he did not desecrate Shabbos at all. Furthermore, could be said, he's doing an act that's helping keep Shabbos. Sein Kavan is given as on his chazik van Shmira Shabbos. Ubechlal, Torah mitzvahs by Yidden. Just to encourage Yidden and to strengthen their commitment to fulfilling Shabbos and all of Torah mitzvahs in general. So then why is it that this act that he did was punishable by death? Is Mevai the Marsha, so the Marsha explains, as the Sizvail lo yodu ha'edim shehisru boy, shuhu asal dazu, because the witnesses that saw him doing what he did, and they warned him that it's Shabbos and he should not do this, that's only with a warning would he be chayiv misa. So they that saw this act and gave him this warning did not know his intentions. And therefore this is only an intention of the heart. And therefore they judged him for death based on what the Eidim said that they witnessed. They saw him being Machal Shabbos. Now seemingly the Marsha is saying that this was sort of a mistake, but this is what happened because the Eidim didn't know any better. They didn't see his intentions and they were just judging him by his actions. But the Rebbe explains that's not what the Marsha is saying. It's nit pshaten them. The meaning of the words of the Marsha is not as mahatim seichel given betos, that when they stoned him to death, this was all a mistake. Mitzad hedi yidiyas Eidim, because of a lack of the Eidim having the ability to know what it is that he's thinking about. That's not the case. He was actually chayiv misa according to Torah. For in Torah is doch Torah semes. When it says in Torah that he has to be placed or stoned to death, it's a Torah of absolute truth. Is oib lefia emes. If the truth is that mitzad kabanosai lechil Shabbos klal, that because of his intentions he did not desecrate Shabbos at all, then the command would not be that he should be placed to death. So rather the reason why it was placed to death is because the chi of skila bedine odom, when it comes to a bezdin of human beings in this world that are judging a person regarding what he did on Shabbos, is al pitayis emes of the maisu pa'ula. The bezdin takes into account what the Eidim are testifying about, what they physically saw in the action that the person did. Und wie bald as ein Maise is given a Maise von Chilul Shabbos, and since the action that he did was an action of desecrating Shabbos, so that is the side or the aspect of the action that's necessary for the Bezdin to know about in order to rule the Yischayiv Misa. Is das al pidin Bezdin Shomata a Pa'ula was mis of dem Mechuyev Skila. So this is an act that according to the way the Bezdin here below rules and judges this matter, he's liable, punishable with stoning to death. Und es klar nit negea sein Kavana. His intentions, his good intentions, do not change, have no relevance for the way Bezdin has to approach this. So there's two sides to his action, there's two aspects to his action. There's the action, the way he is doing it with his intentions. And there, Klap Ishmaya Galia, to heaven, it's known that it's all for good intentions, and therefore it's a Malacha Shtein Tzricha L'Gufa, there's no Chilul Shabbos here at all. But the Torah also says that there's another aspect of the action, which is the physical action, where there's nothing that you can see about this action that he did not need this Malacha that he's doing. It's not like another case where it's Malacha Shtein Tzricha L'Gufa, where you clearly see from the action itself that the earth, like in the case of the ditch, is not being used. The earth is being used and the ditch itself is not needed. Over here, you look at the action, all you see is just the action itself. And for a Bezdin Shalamata, Teres Emes says it's only the action and what the witnesses see in the action that's relevant. It's this aspect of the action that's relevant to rule that there's a Chilul Shabbos here. So therefore, it's on one hand a Chilul Shabbos in the eyes of the Bezdin, but at the same time, though, another aspect of the action in the eyes of Bezdin Shalmaila, in the eyes of heaven, that it's not a Chilul Shabbos. That's the explanation for what happened here with the Mekoshish. So now we come back to understand a deeper connection between the Parsha of Avodah Zarah and the Parsha of Mekoshish. Apizeh is moving the Shaykhis from Mekoshish to Parshas Mekoshish to Parshas Avodah Zarah. Benigay etz Avodah Zarah gefindt man an Inyan miyuchad, was man gefindt nit b'shar mitzvahs HaTorah. Regarding Avodah Zarah, we find something unique that we don't find by other mitzvahs. Yeder Yid afila akal shebekalim. Every single Yid, including the most light-headed amongst light-headed Jews. B'shashes kumtzu an esayim from Avodah Zarah, when it comes to a situation where one is being tested, whether he would serve Avodah Zarah or give up his life. Is a zechmeisa nefesh. He's ready for self-sacrifice, to die and not serve Avodah Zarah. And in the words of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, afilu shalei lasei rak eze maisa levad neged amunas Hashem echad. That includes not even to do something just externally, in his physical behavior, against the oneness of Hashem. Kagayin lehishtachvos l'Avodah Zarah af she'ein maimen ba klal b'libay. To bow to Avodah Zarah, to serve Avodah Zarah, even if in his heart he doesn't believe in it at all. Even for this, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, a Yid is ready to give up his life. And that's something that you find only by Avodah Zarah. But Tzarech Bir, now the question about this is, the Ikar Chet von Avodah Zarah is the Emunah B'Leiv. What is the main point about one that serves an idol? What's the Aveda here? It's the belief in the heart, and it's Machshev als Metzias Echad Mikol Abruim Oiseh Meibishten. It's the fact that a person is giving some kind of significance to one of creations besides Hashem. A Malach, Galgal, a Keichav, whether an angel or whatever other existence, a galaxy or a star. And as Makabel the Avedes Kechavim als Eliah. He accepts upon himself any existence of an idol as an idol. But if the person has no belief in his heart in the existence of this Avodah Zarah, is this nitachet from Avodah Zarah? So whatever act is being done externally is not Avodah Zarah. And he's not detaching himself from Hashem. And on the other hand, but when it comes to Avodah Zarah, even if someone does not give up his life and serves Avodah Zarah, there is no punishment, there's no consequence for this, since the act that was done by force. So even if he is supposed to be ready to give up his life, but since it was done by force, there's no consequence for this. So if this is the case, seemingly by Avodah Zarah, the main thing is the belief in the heart. So why is it that every Yid, without exception, as the Alter Rebbe says, Al Pirayv, I believe in Tanya, is ready to give up his life and not to even bow to Avodah Zarah physically, just in action? So the answer is, Navi Baltos is a Maise from Avodah Zarah. Since this is an act of serving Avodah Zarah, even if it does not have the content of what Avodah Zarah, the Aveda really is about, you're looking and observing what this Yid is doing here below as far as this aspect of the action is concerned, just the physical. So this is serving Avodah Zarah. And therefore, a Yid is ready to give up his life and not even just physically bow to an Avodah Zarah. Und das ist der Hemshech von Parshas Mekoshesh Eitzim b'Yom HaShabbos zu Parshas Avodah Zarah. So this is the reason why the story about the Mekoshesh Eitzim on Shabbos follows after the Parsha of Avodah Zarah. Because Melechas Shabbos is doch kol teichna verbunden mit Machshavte v'Kavanasai. By Melechas of Shabbos, we could also say similar, that its entire idea of resting on Shabbos, and one that desecrates Shabbos by working on Shabbos, it's all about the thought and his intention. As the Gemara tells us, Melechas Machsheves Oster Teira. The Melech of Shabbos that's forbidden, it will be determined by his machshava, by the thought of the person, whether this is a malacha that's forbidden or not. That's the basis of the point explained before, that according to Rab Shimon, if it's a malacha where it's not done for its intended purpose, he would be pater. Or befrat benitten, done, and even more so in our case, was that it is getan l'shem shemayim, where he's doing this malacha on Shabbos for pure motive, for the sake of heaven. Is this klalnit kemaisef and chilul Shabbos? So it's not considered to be at all an act of desecrating Shabbos. Afal pikein, but at the same time, wie bald as die meise mitzadatzma, wie zetois in Welt, is das a meisef and chilul Shabbos? But since there's another aspect to the action here, just the physical action in itself, the way it's observed by people, seeing this, so in that aspect of it, over here, there's a chilul Shabbos. The fact that this was a malacha not done for its intended purpose, hat sich das klal nit angesehen in der Meise. Unlike in other cases, in this case, it's not something that was noticeable at all in the action itself. Is al pi Teres Emes kumt im skilo of der Meise. So therefore, Teres Emes says that aspect of the action is something that is liable for stoning to death. You look at the physical action in itself for what it is, as it's observed by others. So therefore, just like by Avodah Zarah, There is the main inyan of Avodah Zarah, which is the intention, the belief, but nevertheless, Avodah Zarah also has just the physical aspect of it, the bowing to Avodah Zarah that a Yid is ready to give up his life for. Similar regarding Shabbos, the Pasuk continues and says that desecrating Shabbos, although it's mainly determined by the machshava of the person, yet when you have the physical action and you see it in that aspect of it, that it's a chilul Shabbos, for the Bezdin Shalmata, it's enough that al pitayis emes is chayiv misa. That's a continuation of Parshas Mekoshish. Now, Pikolanal, based on all of this, that when euch verstehen die Sheiches beteuchen von Maisa Mekoshish to Maisa Meraglam. We could also explain what's the connection in the content of the story of the Mekoshish to the story of the Meraglam. Okay, so it's not only simply, as Tosfos puts it from the Medrash, that the Yidden were under the impression that they don't have to do mitzvahs anymore, and this is just coming to clarify it and to make the point to all of Yidden that they are obligated in mitzvahs, but there's something deeper in the connection here. It says, Mavur bekam mekaymis, it's explained in many places. As a tam, was the Meraglim haben gewollt bleiben in Midbar und nicht herangehen in Eretz Yisrael. The reason why the Meraglim wanted to remain in the Midbar and not enter into Eretz Yisrael is weil the Iker Eisek von Yidden in Midbar, because what was the main occupation of Yidden while they were in the desert? Wo sie haben sich nicht gedacht, vernehmen mit Eiseka Parnasa v'chulu, where they had no reason and no need to be busy with making a living and so on, is given a limited Torah. So their main occupation was just learning Torah. Ukemayim v'chazal, as it says in the Medrash, le'nitna Torah lidrosh elo lo'ichle aman. To who was the Torah given to expound, and they had all the time in the world to just learn? To the one that were in the midbar and had the food prepared for them. They were eating from the man. Was limited Torah is ikroi the avana v'hasage b'seichel u'machshava. Learning Torah is primarily learning and understanding, comprehending in one's mind and thinking, the machshava, the thought. Learning includes also verbally to speak words of Torah. But that's where it ends, in machshava and dibur, in a person's intellect, and speaking the words of Torah. That was their main occupation in the Midbar. Mashenken in Eretz Yisrael, was dort is doch sheishon and tizra sadecha goy met tizmar karmecha, entering into a settled land where it's necessary to work the land, as the pasuk describes, 6 years you work. Ubepnimi is the ikra avoda dort is maisa. And on a deeper level, the point here is that entering into Eretz Yisrael, the main thing that it would be occupied with is now action, and also mitzvahs maisius. In serving Hashem, this would include many of the mitzvahs physically that they couldn't fulfill up to this point. The befrat kiyum mitzvahs atluyis ba'aretz, those mitzvahs that their fulfillment and obligation is only once they enter the land. On maisim tovim bechlal ubdim tovim, all kinds of good acts, good deeds that are specifically applicable in Eretz Yisrael. That's what would change if they would enter the land. And the Meraglim wanted to remain in the Midbar, to have the opportunity to learn Torah day and night, and to be in a world of machshav and dibur, in thought and in learning Torah with speech as well, but not to come down to the world of action. Now, based on this, we can understand what Tosfos is really saying here about the impression that Yidden had after the story of the Meraglim. The midvet and verstehen divrei medrash shehuvu b'Tosfos anal. We can now understand what the Medrash is saying, the Tosfos quotes. Shahayu Aimrim Yisrael, that Yidden said, Kivin shenigzar aleim shalei lekanis la'aretz b'maisa meraglim shuvei mechuyavim mitzvahs. The Yidden were under the impression that they're not obligated to mitzvahs from this point forward. From Pashtus Lashon HaMedrash is mashma. It seems from the simple words of the Medrash, as Yahweh nit gemeint meidet zayin in eibishn chas v'shalom, that it was not their intention to rebel against Hashem, God forbid. The mitzvah zevel nit mekayim zay mitzvahs, by not fulfilling the mitzvahs, nor ein mechuyavim mitzvahs. Rather, it's that they said to themselves, the obligation does not exist anymore. Ulechayre tamua. So this is very difficult to understand. Was is the tam von zer kasal gedaitach? What led to this conclusion? Why do they think suddenly that all mitzvahs are gone? The fact that there's a punishment that they should not enter the land is one thing, but because of this, now all the obligation of mitzvahs is gone. Now, wollten sie gesagt, kivin shenigzar aleim misa v'chayetze b'zeh. If they would have said something a little differently, since we're staying in the midbar and we are all going to die throughout the next 40 years here, if that would be the expression that the Medrash would say, or something similar, it would be possible to explain what their thinking was, at least but it could be explained. Once it was clear that they're all are going to die, so they thought that they're already like a dead man that does not have any obligations anymore. It's just a matter of time before they die. But the question though is, why? Because there's a decree that they should not enter the land, and therefore there's no obligation of mitzvahs at this point. Now, based on what was explained, we can understand what their thinking was. Vibalt as the inyan from Knisa la'aretz is doch be'iket salib kiyam mitzvahs v'maisa. Since entering the land, the main purpose here is that here they will have the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvahs in action. So therefore they were thinking, since there was a decree that they should not enter into Eretz Yisrael because of what the Meraglim did, that they rejected this opportunity to do mitzvahs b'mais and they wanted to remain in the midbar, they're not obligated in the mitzvahs anymore. So they is nitshayach the avodah from kiyam mitzvahs b'maisa. If there's a decree that they should stay in the midbar, so that means that because they rejected this opportunity and this privilege to go into Eretz Yisrael to fulfill mitzvahs primarily in Eretz Yisrael, that means that Hashem wants them to stay behind, and therefore the mitzvahs in Maisa, in action, they will not merit to fulfill, so therefore they don't have this obligation. And that would include, in their opinion, even those mitzvahs that they were obligated up until that point. Und befragt, was kame Zivuyim sind doch gegeben geworden als Akdome zu Knisa Loretz, and especially many of these obligations or these commands, mitzvahs, were only as an introduction to them entering into the land. As beschus von die mitzvahs wird man reingehen in Eretz Yisrael, that as a merit of fulfilling these mitzvahs, they will enter the land, which is not applicable to them. Unsere ganze Aveda besteht bloß in Limud Teire, b'machshava v'dibur, and therefore ein mechuyavim b'mitzvahs. So therefore, they're punished to stay here outside of Eretz Yisrael, not to have the opportunity to fulfill mitzvahs. So what is their obligation? What is their serving Hashem consist of? Just to learn Torah. Thought and speech, but in mitzvahs, physically, in actions, are not obligated. That was their understanding. And this explains how the story of the Mekosher Shetzim comes in here. He desecrated Shabbos and he was put to death, and everybody saw a point here. What's the point that they saw? What this expressed is, as euch in die inyanim, was called teichnom is meleches machshavas, even regarding such matters where the whole content of this is all about the thought of the person that determines what he's doing. And he did what he did with a good intention, for the sake of heaven. Not to transgress and to go against the will of Hashem. From deswegen, nevertheless, is euch bezeh, even in this case, the ikir, the maise b'payil. The primary thing is the physical act that's done. Was the far zok teiris emes, and therefore Torah, which is a Torah of truth, says as the psak halacha lemata is as das is chil Shabbos and as kumter far skila. That in the bezin here below that looks at the physical action as it is, as it's, and we can see it by observing what the physical action is, it is punishable by death as someone that is desecrating Shabbos. Und das hat gelernt die Yidden, this taught the Yidden the point, was then a demoled geblieben in Midbar. The Yidden that are staying behind and are going to die here in the Midbar and not entering to Eretz Yisrael, as that although it was decreed upon them not to enter Eretz Yisrael, is this not as a kuminit on zum ikir ki mitzvahs b'maise visis in Eretz Yisrael. They will not have the privilege to fulfill the mitzvahs in action in their on the main level, in the primary sense, as it is once they come into Eretz Yisrael. However, they as well, verbleiben the Midbar, even while they remain in the Midbar, is the Aveda Negeya Be'ikir V'des Kumt Arap B'maisa B'payil. They're serving Hashem. What's relevant primarily is the action that's done. It's not enough the thought and speech, it has to come down into action. I feel as shayach b'midbar, as much as it's possible to fulfill mitzvahs in action in the midbar. Similar to Shabbos, that over here, the machshav is the main determining factor for the malacha, but nevertheless, it's the actual physical chilul Shabbos that brought the Chiyuv Misa, same here, that although they're in a midbar, in a place where the environment is primarily for learning Torah and Machshava and Dibur, but nevertheless, the Maisa is also the Ikr here as well. Weil Ikr Inyan mitzvah, because the main point of a mitzvah, which is tzafsa v'chibur mit neibischen, a mitzvah means not only a command but also a connection with Hashem that commands a mitzvah, is durech Maisa ha-mitzvah, is formed through the act of the mitzvah.